Hello and welcome back to another Rush Duel deck profile. Today we're taking a look at Chemicalize Pyro, which is using the Fatal Roar skill. So we did get two new skills, or I guess three technically, but kind of two main skills for Pyro from the latest box. One focuses around the equip spell, which gives you basically recyclable access to that, and once per game you can search out your back row hate, and you can also search out another card called Scales of Flame. I don't really like that skill very much. I don't think it really does anything to progress the game plan particularly well, so I haven't really been using it, but Fatal Roar is actually a pretty good skill. So this can be activated from turn 2 onward during a turn that you normal or special summon a normal monster face up. If all of the monsters in your constructed deck are Pyro-type monsters and all of the effect monsters of 100 or more defense, so this specifically right now locks us out of using the Noodles, send the top 3 cards of your deck to the graveyard. If you do not have a face-up level 7 or higher effect monster on the field, you can also add a 7 or lower monster with 1500 or more defense from your graveyard to your hand. So 1500 or more defense is quite important because that means we can only use it to get back very specific monsters such as Ember the Super Assistant, Ember the Hyper Assistant, and our boss monsters being Salamander and Chromatograph. Oh, and also Flame Ruler, we can't forget about him because he does have that 1600 defense. So that is a quite large number of cards we can get back with this, but we won't be able to get back absolutely everything. We can't get back our 1500 vanillas, for example. But the skill basically gives us easy access to boss monsters, and it gives us relatively easy access to extra bodies from our graveyard. We get basically a free plus every turn, which is pretty good. The downside is we don't really have a lot to do with once we get all those bodies, and we'll go through that a little bit at the end when we get to the strategy. But for now, let's go through the card by card. So we have Chemicalized Salamander, 2500 attack, pretty decent, 1500 defense, so it does meet the quota for our skill. Requirement, shuffle 3 Pyro-type monsters from your graveyard into the deck. All face-up monsters on your opponent's field lose attack equal to the number of monsters in your opponent's graveyard times 100 until the end of this turn. So the later on in the game this is, the bigger negative this will be, which is pretty good, right? If we say we get this quite late, maybe your opponent's got 10 monsters in the graveyard, reducing all of your opponent's monsters' attack by 1000 is pretty good. Now the downside is your opponent needs to have face-up monsters. We do have to shuffle 3 back from our graveyard, which can be seen as an upside, but we do actually have to have 3 in the graveyard. And if your opponent doesn't have 3 face-up monsters, we're not going to be getting as much value out of it. But I do really like this card. I think it's got one of the coolest arts in all of Rush Duels. And I really, like I say, I do like this card. I just think it's a little bit underpowered in the current meta. I think realistically, most of the time, this is going to be reducing your opponent's board by somewhere between 200 to 600, like most of the time. Obviously, when it does get more than that, it feels actually quite impactful, but otherwise, it's like, it lets you break a board quite often, and not really much more past that. Next up for our legend monster, Flame Ruler. Quite simple card, 1500 attack, 1600 defense, not bad for level 4. This face-up card can be treated as 2 tributes to the tribute summon of a fire attribute monster in attack position. So basically, we just use it to get out our bosses a little bit easier, and that is kind of a theme of this deck. We're quite good at getting our bosses onto the field. The problem is we don't really do much with them once they're there. The next card we're going to talk about is Ember the Hyper Assistant. This card is quite notable for having 800 attack and also 1500 defense, which is quite nice. If your opponent has a monster on the field, we can send this face-up card from your field to the graveyard to special summon a level 7 or higher Pyro-type monster from your hand face-up to your field. If we have Ember the Super Assistant in your graveyard, then the monster special summoned by this effect gains 800 attack until the end of this turn. So that's actually pretty cool. So this kind of acts a little bit like Flame Ruler. We get to special summon out a monster from our hand. This is a little bit awkward though, because this does leave us open to Rice Terror Secure. But when we do this, if we do just so happen to have the Super Assistant in the graveyard, the monster we summon gets an extra 800. So our Chromatograph or our Chemicalized Salamander will come out as 33, which is quite good. 33 being above 3000, very, very relevant number because there are a lot of 3000 monsters running around at the moment. So Ember the Hyper Assistant, actually really, really cool. Then we have Magma Bear. And Magma Bear is a little bit of a suspect inclusion. I don't really like this card because of its low stats, and getting pierced over can get you punished quite a lot. Other than that, it's okay. If you have no other monsters on your field, place a Pyro-type monster from your graveyard on the bottom of your deck. Add 1 Pyro-type normal monster from your graveyard to your hand. So this is basically yet another way to get extra bodies to get our big boss monsters onto the field a little bit easier. Now, it's not super duper crazy. One thing you can do with this is any Pyro normal, which means we can get back Chromatograph if we want to get a boss, which is quite nice. It basically is Paku Pikachu, but for Pyro, and that's not bad. I would say this is probably the weakest card in the deck, but we still like having it. It has come up a few times. Then we have Chromatographics. Again, has that 1600 defense, which means we can use it with the skill. 2500 attack, level 7 vanilla. Pretty good. That does mean we can summon it using Secret Order, which is going to be the primary reason it's in here. But also the fact that it's a normal monster means we can use our skill while we have this on the field, and because it's not an effect monster, we can still get that plus from the skill, which is very, very good. Then we have Germalu, 1500 attack, 1400 defense. Most importantly, it's a normal monster, and we can only trigger our skill when we summon a normal monster, so important for that. Then we have the Ember, another 1500 defender, quite relevant, and obviously it does turn on Ember the Hyper Assistant. And then we have Dr. Redrobe, another 1500, which will again trigger our skill. For a legend spell, Pot of Greed, just getting more cards is generally quite good. With this deck, we typically want to just keep drawing as much as we can, because we really need to just find our bosses. We will be milling 3 cards, but finding bosses is very, very important for this deck. If we don't find bosses, we don't really get to do anything, which is why I've gone for Pot of Greed. If I wasn't playing Pot of Greed, I would probably be playing realistically Tribute to the Doomed, and that's because this deck can really struggle to get through set 3 pass. So I think having Tribute to the Doomed as one way to do that is a way to alleviate that, but we'll go over that at the end. Then we have the Secret Orders. This is our limit 3 of choice, and this is again pretty good. We can just get out our Chromatographics. It gets the extra 700 attack, comes out as 32. It's basically a 1-card boss. Very, very good. I mean, Secret Order in general is just a fantastic card. There's no reason not to play it. Then we have 3 copies of Fiery Blaze, which is our back row hate and also has a little bit of burn attached to it. Then we're on Trap Hole. And the reason we're on Trap Hole, you probably noticed we were on Trap Hole in the last deck profile as well, is this deck realistically isn't going to be beating dragons. This deck will beat dragons only if the dragon pilot is really, really bad or if they hard brick. And because of that, we've decided to go all in on Trap Hole because other than dragons, the next most popular deck on the ladder is Gaia, and Trap Hole is probably the best back row into Gaia, which is why I've gone for that. It's in general not a bad card anyway, but again, if you do fall behind early, Trap Hole isn't going to save you, whereas Widespread or Negate Attack could. And then last but not least, Buffered Slime. Again, it's okay into Gaia, depending on which version of Gaia it is, which is why we've got this card in here. So overall, the deck is a little bit weak. So we have found that if we're playing against most of the field, the deck actually performs alright. We've had a lot of wins against Cyber Dragon. We've had a lot of wins against other kind of mid to low tier decks. We, however, have taken 0 games off of dragons with this build. We have taken a fair amount against Metarion Gaia, but those were hard fought victories, and I think they weren't necessarily the strongest players. But overall, I would say this deck is actually pretty competent at doing what it wants to do, which is summoning guys, getting out a load of big bodies on the board, similar to what the old Worm deck would do, but it really lacks that little bit of extra punch. We don't have really ways to buff our guys up a lot. We do have ways to reduce our opponent's board, but generally by not too much, which can be enough to close games, but it basically relies on our opponent playing into us, right? They need to leave a bunch of attack position monsters on the field and not kill us before we get to use Chemicalized Salamander's effect to reduce their board and then get back at them for a load of damage. The biggest issue this deck has, in my opinion, again, is just a lack of way to get damage in. We have to rely on our opponent leaving guys in attack. That is basically the only thing we have. So you could be saying, okay, so why aren't we putting in cards to help out with that? Well, the only way to really do that is to include a lot of one-offs, right? So we could have, for example, Tribute to the Doomed instead of Pot of Greed. That would be one way. But okay, now we need to find that one-off to actually get any damage in. The other thing we could do is play something like Stop Defense, which does work quite well, and the alternative would be Pierce. But playing those spell cards with no incremental synergies feels really, really bad. As well as the fact we never get our bosses particularly big. Like, we can get them up to like 3,000, a little bit over 3,000. But when we think about decks that are running Pierce in the past, we're really thinking about Royal Rebels, who would pop an opponent's boss monster, go up to 5,000 attack, then get Pierce, and then that is a substantial amount of damage for the investment of having to run the Pierce and find the Pierce. So I really don't think Pierce and Stop Defense are necessarily great for this deck, but if you want this deck to have a possibility of being able to beat, for example, the Dragon Fusion deck, I think they are going to be a necessity. Basically, we, with this list, already decided we're not going to beat dragons. We've already decided we have lost the dragon matchup, so we have tried to tailor it in such a way as to beat everything else that isn't dragons, and we had decent success with that. We actually did see quite a few win streaks with this deck, so it was performing at an okay level some of the time. Again, the main losses we had were to Metarion Gaia, which we were winning, I think, about 50% of our games against that. And dragons, we just lost 100% of our games against dragons. So not really great there. The main issue we have with dragons is we can either Go aggressive, which means summoning a load of high levels to the board, which then gives our dragon opponent the ability to use the skill, get the double search, and then they can just pop off and absolutely kill us, so we don't have the exact perfect back row. We're just dead, and if they have back row hate, we're also just dead. Alternatively, we go defensive, then they'll also just go defensive, and then we'll just sit there staring at each other until they draw out their means to kill us through set 3, whilst we don't have that option. So either we play the stall game, which we lose, or we play the aggro game, which is hope they brick, or we lose. So it really does feel like a bit of a lose-lose situation. That being said, everything other than dragon definitely felt winnable. This deck is very fun to play, but again, we really are hurting for that pierce, or that flipping guys up, or that popping face down, or multi-tap. We just need something to get to our opponent's life points, and that is what this deck really lacks. This deck can win games, it has won games, it's really good at punishing your opponent if they make really sloppy plays, but other than that, it's probably not going to be a tiered deck. But let's fire into the replays, so I could show you what I've been talking about.